All right, here's how the slide rankings work. We start at the top of the ladder with two fighters. They're judged strictly on what they did in this division, under the Zuffa banner. No outside stuff, no fantasy matchups. The winner holds on to their spot, and the loser doesn't get tossed. They slide down the board to face the next challenger. And that keeps going until every fighter finds their place. Simple, clean, efficient. And trust me, it's not going to work the way you think. It's going to get real spicy. This is the slide rankings. All right, we got my boy Frankie back on here, man. My brother. It's been way too long.
Way too long.
Yeah, but it's good that you're back on for sure. So
No,
how are things going?
They're good, man. I'm having a nice vacation. I bring you up in like almost every stream that I have in the hope that you will invite me back on, and I'm finally glad to see that has come to fruition, and that you brought me back on, because it reminds me that I'm an adult when I can get on with you and talk about things that are actually relevant, as opposed to other things that I won't even mention.
The streams are dope. They get crazy, but they're dope though, for sure. So we're going to talk about the featherweights, and the all-time featherweights, that is. So I've explained how this works. And so for anybody that hasn't seen how this works, refer back to the beginning of the video. But we're going to dive directly into the featherweights. And this first one is kind of controversial. I think some people might think it's controversial, but I'm curious where you're going to go with it. So the first two people that I'm going to bring up for the number one spot, Jose Aldo and Alexander Volkanovski.
Pretty easy one for me. I'm going to go with Alex, and you were probably expecting that. Outside of the fact that, like, obviously he has a win against him, I feel like Volk would hold up in probably any era. And like I said, Aldo has a few notable losses that have kind of put a little bit of a dark mark on his career more lately. I do think Aldo is one of the greatest of all time, and I'm not taking a dunk on his career at all, but I think in terms of well-rounded, how well he would stack up in any era, I've got to go with Alex. I think he's one of the greatest to ever do it. I think he's not just the featherweight great, but he's one of the goats of the sport in general. So I'd go with Alex on that one.
It's hard to disagree on that. And for me, that's just those are two tough people to compare. When I look at their featherweight legacy, and I'm just looking at featherweight, not looking at what Jose did at bantamweight or Alex going up and challenging it at lightweight. But what Jose did in the WEC and the UFC, winning 10 title fights.
And going defending his belt for as long as he did.
Yeah. Defending his belt 7 times in the UFC, 2 times in the WEC. That's the reason that I hold him in such high regard, even over people that he may have lost against. But it's hard to argue against Alex Volkanovski and what he's done, especially reclaiming the belt, for sure. So that moves Jose Aldo down to go against the next guy, and everybody knows who the next guy is going to be. The next guy is Max Bless Holloway.
This is another tricky one. Like, again, you can't overlook what Aldo did during the WEC days. I'm going to, again, have to go against him and go with Max Holloway. I think, the legacy that he's established in this division, he's beaten pretty much everyone in it, apart from 2 guys that I would rank above him. That I'm not going to say right now who they are. He was only knocked down twice in that weight class, or knocked down once in that weight class. Only knocked out once in that weight class.
Yeah.
Obviously beat Aldo several times. And I think people who go against that would maybe make the argument that Aldo was maybe not in his prime when those two fought. I would argue against that. I would say he maybe wasn't the best version of Aldo that we got in the WEC days, and slightly beyond that. But he was a good enough Aldo where you could see there was a definite skill disparity there. So based on the like how the game has changed and the level of competition that Holloway faced in comparison to that. And I think how Holloway would have done in the WEC era, this version of Holloway, I'd have to go with Holloway again. So sorry to Jose fans, but we've got to put Holloway above him as well. But it's close. It's not like a landslide or anything. No.
Yeah. Okay. Jose is making a slide, and this is why I call them the slide rankings, because people tend to take a slide. All right, so we got Jose Aldo still here. Let's spice it up. Let's go Jose Aldo and Uriah Faber.
So when I was kind of doing, I promised you I wouldn't do any research for this one, but I kind of felt like I had to do a little touch just to, not sound like a complete MMA newbie. Uriah Faber's an interesting one. He's had like a very underrated career in terms of MMA on the whole. I wouldn't go as far as to call him a pioneer, which I think a lot of people would call him, because he was obviously somebody who brought the sport to national attention, had faced great competition. I very comfortably put Aldo above him because, again, first of all, Aldo beat him, but also Faber was one of those people who was always undersized as a featherweight. I feel like the best work he did was at bantamweight. And while he did have some notable wins in that division, I think if you put him, if you even consider him in that era or in this one, I don't think he'd be top 10, like genuinely, certainly not in this one. Whereas a prime Aldo certainly would be. So I think it's a landslide for me. I'd have Aldo as higher on the GOAT list very easily. Uriah Faber.
That's a good pick. And Uriah Faber, and I've said it many, many times, Uriah Faber is one of the people who got me into this sport. So I'm always going to hold him in high regard. But Jose did beat him, and beat him pretty handedly, and tore up his legs. Uriah Faber did defend that belt 5 times. And you know how heavy I weigh title defenses, but I don't disagree with how he would stack up against featherweights now. They are much bigger, and he's much more of a natural bantamweight. But that being said, he did walk away with those wins. He does have a win over Dominic Cruz in that division. So that does help, but yeah, it's hard to disagree with that. All right, so Uriah Faber is still here. Let's go Uriah Faber or Mike Brown.
Oh, okay. The thing is in Mike Brown's somebody who certainly wouldn't be very well known to more modern fans of MMA. He's actually somebody that I have in my top 10 featherweights of all time. But funnily enough, if I'm thinking about the list in my head right now, I'd have Uriah Faber, funnily enough, a place above him. He had amazing wins against good competition when the division wasn't really as esteemed at the time. He beat people like Curran, and he did beat Uriah Faber as well.
Knocked him
and he
out.
kind of forced his way into a fight with Aldo. I do think, though, even more so than Faber, I think if you picked him up and dropped him in featherweight now, he would get annihilated, in my opinion. But, it's very hard to make a declaration like that when nutrition has changed, and obviously there's been progressions in the game that we can't account for. He was very gritty, very well-rounded. I felt like the Faber lot, I'm going against what I just said with the last pick, but I would slightly edge Faber above him. I do think Mike Brown was a more natural featherweight, though, so I feel like this one might be a little bit controversial, but I'm going to go with Faber on this one.
Cool. Okay. Here's where things get a little dicey. All right. So Mike Brown still here. Let's go Mike Brown against, and of course, this is not fighting. This is just their legacy. Mike Brown, Conor McGregor.
Yeah, I'm going to go Conor McGregor. And I don't even love having him in my featherweight GOAT list at all, because with McGregor, the mistake that a lot of us often make is that obviously the impact that he had on the sport can't be denied. And obviously he's somebody who's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, especially people who don't watch the sport as regularly as we do. I would say though, featherweight was the best version of McGregor that we saw. In his pomp, he would step up. He famously obviously took on people like Chad Mendes at short notice, which is a horrible fight for anyone to take, whatever notice you're going to take that at. Obviously starched one of the greatest fighters of all time in Aldo. And he also had notable wins against Poirier and Holloway, who I know Holloway was early on in his career. Poirier did his best work at lightweight. They're still very good names to have on a resume. So I would have said that a prime McGregor would have beat tar out of Mike Brown. Or sorry, not Mike Brown. Yeah, Mike Brown, he would have beat the tar out of Mike. So I'm going to go with McGregor on that one.
Okay. Mike Brown, still here. Let's go Mike Brown with somebody that is very McGregor-esque in Ilia Topuria.
I mean, murder. Would have been murder. I mean, Ilia Topuria for me is, funnily enough, if you asked me to make an all-time featherweight GOAT list right now, I wouldn't have Ilia number one, purely because competition he's faced, how long he's been in the division and whatnot. But Ilia Topuria is one of those guys that I genuinely feel like he's maybe 3 elite wins away from being the GOAT of the sport in general. I think he's, regardless of what you think of the people that he's fought or how he's done it, and I don't think many people can dispute what he's done and how he's done it. It's more the eye test as MMA fans when you look at the skill set that he's got. And I made this very, very clear when he fought Charles Oliveira. A lot of people obviously weren't aware of the grappling potential that he has. Not only is he an elite boxer who's incredible and can knock the fuck out of anyone who weighs a similar weight to he does in that domain, but I genuinely think we still haven't seen the best of his grappling ability. And we saw like a glimpse of it. Yeah, we saw like a glimpse of it, obviously, against Charles, who he absolutely dismantled. So yeah, that's a cakewalk for me. I think he would dice him in about 2 seconds. So I'm going to go with El Matador.
Yeah, he walks straight through.
One of the greatest fighters of all time. Walks through.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Here's what's funny about Ilia Topuria and Conor McGregor is, I believe in the featherweight division, they both have 7 victories, no defeats. They both have fought for a belt 2 times, 2 title fights. Both of them won those title fights by knockout. No defeats at that weight class, the exact same number of fights. Conor's first win was that Chad Mendes fight, short notice, but he did.
It kind of counts. Yeah,
but it's an interim. It's an interim. It's a title fight.
It counted.
Yeah, and then he starches Jose Aldo, Ilia, Volk, Max. They're very similar types of runs when it comes to the featherweight division. So, yeah, it's really interesting. I didn't even notice that until I started really looking into this stuff. So we got Mike Brown still here.
He's still here.
Poor Mike. Let's go Mike Brown to somebody who had an interim belt. Yair Rodriguez. See, that's what I was saying. Once we get into the middle of the list, things start getting real interesting.
This is a tough one. I think if we're talking legacy, Mike Brown has the better legacy, in my opinion. Because I think Yair is a little whiny crybaby who has fraud-checked his way into every opportunity that he's had. This is a weird one because I feel like if they fought both at their best, I would probably pick Yair. However, if we're talking what they've done in the sport and what they've done in the division on the whole, I'd go with Mike Brown. So I'm going to go with my gut and say him. I'm going to say, yeah. Like I said, it's a weird question because I feel like Yair would beat him. But in terms of what Yair has accomplished within the division, I gotta go Mike Brown. I feel like he's done more, and the longevity was there. I'm gonna go with Mike Brown. People are gonna go nuts on me for that one, but I hope I've made my case very clear.
You know, the people that'll go nuts are the people that didn't see him fight.
Time to check the board to see where we're at. Did you guys have Conor as a top 5 featherweight of all time? Let us know in the comments. You know we love engaging with you guys about your opinions. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps out more than you know. Let's get back to Jackson Frankie.
Fight. You know, when Mike Brown fought Uriah Faber, the 2 times that he did, he was definitely not known, and he definitely wasn't expected to win. For him to put away Uriah Faber and then come back and beat him again, like that, when Uriah Faber was really at the peak of his powers in that division.
It felt justified when you got Aldo as well. It felt justified. Like it wasn't and Aldo was an absolute murderer at the time. And when Mike Brown was put in there with him, people were thinking he's got a decent chance, which is a lot to say about coming up against that Aldo. So.
Yeah. And then if you look at like the head to head, like if Mike Brown were to fight Yair Rodriguez, I would definitely favor Yair. But what we've seen from Mike Brown throughout while he's been coaching is his mind for the game. And I think that his ability to think the game would cause Yair all kinds of problems. So I think that fight would be a lot closer than many might think. Just because Yair, he would have the physical tools, but Mike would have the mental.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you on that one. Yeah, I think that's a fair pick. Yeah.
All right, so Yair is up. Let me see. Let me get a good one for Yair. Let's go Yair and Chad Money Mendez.
I'll go Mendez. Mendez is very underrated in my opinion. Like he's one of those guys who was like, you know, the bridesmaid, never the bride, never was a champion.
Yeah.
But he was always a tough out, always very, very well rounded. I feel like he's had a better career within MMA that's meant more, certainly in the featherweight division. And I would actually favor him. I feel good about picking this one because I feel like both of them in their prime. I'd take Mendez in that fight as well, just because I think the wrestling aptitude he has would be a very bad matchup for somebody like Yair. And I think he's gritty enough to take the shots that Yair can throw. Again, Mendez is one of those ones who was very much I feel like he underachieved a lot in MMA. Yeah. But I feel like he came along in a time when he just kind of like he had an absolute war with Jose Aldo that was as close as it gets, a prime Aldo. And I don't think any version of Yair would be able to put a dent in the best version of Aldo. I think it would be disrespectful to even suggest so. The fact that Mendez was able to do something like that and come close to a title, I'd go with Chad.
Yeah, and then Chad made Conor work. I mean, it was on short notice, but he made Conor work.
I know it was only 2
to get
rounds.
That win.
He made McGregor look vulnerable at featherweight, it was an intense 7.5 minutes for however long. And McGregor was on the cusp of getting out of there. So go with Chad. Yeah. And his name's Chad.
So Chad. And there's a lot of people who can give an intense 7.5 minutes.
Yeah. It's been a few years since I've done that, but I'm not going to get into that. Do about 2 these days. Not my problem.
Strong 2.
Not my problem. Yeah.
All right, so we got Yair. He's still here. He's sliding. Let's put him up against somebody that he actually did fight. Yair against Frankie the Answer Edgar.
I'd have to go Edgar. While we're talking about this, I really hope that Yair ends up at the bottom of the list, but I don't know who's going to come.
He won't.
Frankie Edgar is a phenomenon to me. As somebody who's not the most physically imposing person myself, Frankie Edgar to me is one of the greatest fighters in MMA history, purely because he operated in a time where things were a little bit more loose. You know, I feel like with Frankie Edgar, if he had operated as a featherweight for the entirety of his career, I feel like he would have been a multiple champion, very well-rounded, explosive hands, really good wrestling, durable as fuck.
Yep.
Put on great fights as well. Obviously, he has like amazing wins against people like Mendez, Faber, Jeremy Stevens. I know people don't put too much stock in that name, but that guy is fucking dangerous.
He is very dangerous.
He beat Swanson, BJ Penn. He beat Oliveira, who was at featherweight. It was, you know, I know featherweight Oliveira is a little bit different, but it's a good win to have. Frankie Edgar was one of the best to ever do it, and I feel like he was a victim of the era in that he was obviously small enough to make bantamweight. I don't think that was ever the right division for him, but as a featherweight, I feel like he would have had a much better career, as I said, if he'd operated longer in that division. So
yeah,
I think Frankie Edgar would have dealt with Yair Rodriguez in his prime and as a better legacy, which is what we're talking about. So yeah, undoubted.
And I saw Frankie Edgar deal with Yair Rodriguez, a young Yair Rodriguez, here in Dallas. Handled him, took him down, and showed the blueprint on how to beat Yair. And the blueprint remains the same. It's no different.
I think that was an easier one.
Yair Rodriguez still on the board. Here's what'll make it a little tricky. Yair Rodriguez, Brian Ortega.
Oh, I'm gonna go Brian Ortega. I do think Yair. This is a very good comparison because they literally could not be more polar opposite in the way that they game plan for a fight. Yair is obviously going to bring, like he's elusive. He's got very creative striking, dynamic striking, and Brian Ortega is a punching bag. He's very durable. However, again, I would go with the grappling edge. And again, I think the legacy that he's had, I think Brian Ortega has shown more activity. He's gotten against better competition. And I think he's more of a direct threat at that weight class. Because if you're comparing their legacies, they both got a very similar legacy in that they both weren't champions. They both fought very similar competition. They've obviously fought each other. And obviously, Ortega has the win over him as well. Did they fight twice? I can't remember.
They did. Brian Ortega got hurt in the first one.
Right. And then he won the second one.
Yep.
I mean, this is like razor close. I feel like if anybody had a difference of opinion about that, I wouldn't mind it, but it would be pretty weak in my opinion. It pretty much comes down to, I don't think you can make a solid case for one over the other, but I don't like Yair Rodriguez and I'm going to pick Brian Ortega. And I don't care what people have to say about it.
It's interesting. I mean, I think that those are very close comparisons too. And I don't even know who I would pick, to be honest. Yair does have the interim belt that he won over Josh Emmett. But when both of them were healthy, and we did get to see them in their primes fight each other with both of them healthy, Brian Ortega was the one that won. Now, mind you, he was getting beat up on the way into getting that submission, but
it shows the clash of styles between the two of them. I mean, it's like you said, like Yair was piecing the fuck out of him, but then when it mattered and when the win needed to be made, Brian Ortega came through. So
yeah,
I feel like you can edge him for that reason. I feel like it's something, considering how close their legacies are, the fact that one has a very clear, distinctive win over the other, exploited the holes in his game. You've got to go with Brian Ortega, my opinion, but I'm sure people will make a strong case either way.
Yeah. All right, so Yair still here on this slide. Let's go against somebody else that he fought. Yair, and I already know who you're going to pick. Korean Zombie.
Korean Zombie? Korean Zombie, here's the thing about him. I feel like he's one of those people who had like I feel like his career would have been much better if he didn't have certain obstacles get in his way that were against his control. So he had, obviously did the military service, which took him out of the game for 2 years. He fought in multiple eras where he was incredible in WEC, and he came to the UFC, was equally amazing, always put on great fights. He isn't a soy little you-know-what as well, which kind of adds to my... I know that Yair Rodriguez beat him, but I remember watching that fight. It was a fantastic fight, by the way. If anyone
one of the
hasn't
best.
seen it, go back and watch it. It was one of the greatest featherweight fights ever. Korean Zombie schooled his ass for 24 minutes and 59 seconds, pretty much. And then
he was on his way to winning that fight.
He won it. It was going to be 5-0. It was going to be 5-0. And obviously Yair, I don't think it was but it was one of the latest finishes. It was probably one of the greatest comeback finishes in UFC history.
Yeah.
Korean Zombie showed who was the better fighter that night. And if he stayed awake for the full 25, he would have won that fight and it would be undeniable. But I think legacy-wise as well, in terms of the longevity and the fact that I feel like Zombie's career was hindered more by the outside factors, I'd have to go with Korean Zombie. I think he's the better, well-rounded fighter who, again, like I said, was hindered by things that were out of his control. So I feel like legacy-wise and matchup-wise, I feel very comfortable in picking Zombie on that one.
Yeah. All right. Yair still sliding. His slide may stop right here. Yair Rodriguez or Josh Emmett?
Ooh. Yeah, I'd go with Yair. And I feel painful saying that. It makes it, after all the slander I've just given, it makes me sound like Emmett's terrible. He's absolutely not. Emmett's a very good wrestler. He's got power in his hands. Very comparable legacies in that, again, not champions, faced decent competition in the modern era. I don't think Emmett ever really got close enough to being at the top of the mountain, regardless of what people think of Yair's rise and whether he deserved it or not. He's been close and remains close to being in title contention. So I think legacy-wise, I'd have to pick Yair. If the two of them were to fight, tough one to call. I think that would be a pick'em all day long. Emmett obviously has the ability to shut his lights out at any second and has the wrestling to probably cause him some problems. I don't know how that fight would go. And Yair obviously has the skill set that he has. If we're going legacy versus legacy, I'd have to go with Yair just purely on the fact that he has been close and remains somewhat close, deservedly or not. He's still there. So I'd reluctantly and go Yair with that one.
All right. So Josh Emmett is still here. I know you didn't want to pick Yair on that one, but eventually he was going to go. All right. So Josh Emmett's still here. Josh Emmett or Ricardo Lamas?
Oh, God. Again, if we're talking legacy, I'd have to go Lamas. This feels like an unfair one because obviously, for me, Lamas acted, or he was operational in an era that I don't think was it's unarguable in my opinion. It's not as good as it is now and not as deep as it is now. But in terms of the impact that he made on the sport, the people that he fought in, and the wars that he had, I'd have to go with him. But it's another weird one where I felt like if they fought, I would favor Josh Emmett in that fight. I'm just remembering as well. Josh Emmett's your boy.
He is.
I hope he doesn't see this video. I hope he's unfollowed you. Or unsubscribed rather. Yeah, I think Josh Emmett would beat him in the same way that I think Josh Emmett I'd probably edge him over Yair as well. But in terms of the legacy of the sport, Lamas is he's one of the guys who, like, for us unks, where that guy was incredible. Never was a champion or anything like that, but he was competitive against really good guys and left a big mark on the sport. So I go with Lamas.
Yep, he did, and he continues to as a coach. Interesting thing about Ricardo Lamas. So he has wins over Cub Swanson, Dennis Bermudez, Eric Koch, and he has losses to Aldo, Mendez, Holloway, which was the birth of the point down to the ground thing, and to Josh Emmett. He lost it, and Josh Emmett knocked him out.
Yeah. A slightly older Lamas, you'd have to say.
It was.
Yeah. It was. I completely forgot that they'd fought.
But it was an older one. It was an older one.
It's more of a sacrificial situation.
Yeah, he was on his way out, 100%.
Yeah.
All right, so we got two more people on the board. The last two people, Josh Emmett and somebody I just mentioned before, Cub Swanson.
I've got to go Cub. I've got to. Cub is one of those people who, again, didn't achieve the things that he probably potentially could have in the sport. Another person who, again, crossed generations. He was somebody who had incredible longevity. And even though he lost against notable competition, it always felt like it was competitive back in the day. Like, he fought some absolute monsters. He's had some good wins and good losses along the way. And by, it's very hard to call anything a good loss, but you know what I mean, in terms of, he didn't completely embarrass himself. He's one of those people who I think is in the top 15 best featherweights ever, which kind of showed me as well that, like, thinking about the division as a whole, and I don't mean to take a dunk on Swanson at all here, but, like, the history of the division is not as amazing as people seem to think it was. Because I find that, like, the top 5 featherweights are quite easy to pick. People will rank them in different ways. But when you get to, like, that 5 to 15 region, it's very open and very interchangeable. And there's loads of people that you could slot into there. But Cub Swanson is somebody who I think, longevity-wise, competition-wise, the fact that he won not that long ago. And for a guy who's the age that he is, I've got nothing but respect for that. In terms of his legacy in the sport, his legacy far outweighs that of Josh Emmett's. Again, they fought. I feel bad for your boy Emmett because I'd pick him probably in a fight against most people that I've overlooked him for. But in terms of legacy in the sport, Cub Swanson, no doubt.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Cub is the only one on the list that hasn't fought for any version of the title. Everybody else on the list fought for either interim belt or the actual belt. And Cub Swanson, he has wins over Dustin Poirier, Stevens, Du Ho Choi, and who cares about Artem Lobov? But he did beat him.
The GOAT.
He lost.
You should have thrown Artem Lobov in there. He'd have been out of there immediately, like straight at the top. Lobov.
That changes everything. He lost to Aldo in the number 1 contender fight. Remember the double knee? So for Cub, like, he would always get right there. It was a lot of
it was nearly
just kind of how Bisping was back in the day. He would just get right there and lose the number 1 contender fight. If Bisping didn't get over the hump, they would have the same career.
Pretty much, yeah, I totally agree. He's one of the great. He's just great personality, and again, I very much favor somebody who was able to. We often ask the question of how would a fighter in a certain era do in the modern day. The fact that he's picked up wins in the modern day against very good competition says to me that he's just generally a good fighter. But also, he's much more well known within the sport. Old fans will know him, new fans will know him. Everyone loves him. It's Cub. It's Cub.
Yep, it's Cub. So let me show you how you did here. Here we go. All right, here's the rankings. This is what you got. Alexander Volkanovski, Max Holloway, Jose Aldo, Uriah Faber, Conor McGregor, Ilia Topuria, Mike Brown, Chad Mendez, Frankie Edgar, Brian Ortega, Korean Zombie, Yair Rodriguez, Ricardo Lamas, Cub Swanson, and Josh Emmett. So out of all of these, you can move one person either up or down. Who would you move? Or would you move anyone?
I would move Ilia Topuria. I would
Where would
move
you put
Ilia
him?
Topuria above even Max Holloway. And I know that's something. I know that's something that is gonna. I'm kind of ending it on a bombshell. I feel like Ilia is one of those people again who, while he might not have the legacy that Holloway has in the division, I think the definitive way. If we were talking about a Holloway that was completely washed, and again, if Holloway had come off that loss, and then he'd gone into that fight with who did he fight last? It was Dustin Poirier. If he'd gone into that fight and looked awful, I'd maybe be singing a different tune. But the fact that he's gone on to still show that he's still got it,
Yep.
and the way that Topuria absolutely dispatched him. And again, Max had his moments in that fight where he looked really good, but it felt inevitable. It felt inevitable, even though I had Holloway probably winning the first 2 rounds.
I think he did.
It felt like sooner or later, Ilia was going to catch him and put him away, and that's inevitably what happened.
Yeah.
I feel like Ilia's legacy is probably going to be I think beating Holloway and Volkanovski the way that he did.
Mm-hmm.
To me, those are, and if you obviously, I know Topuria is in a different weight class, but those two alone as back-to-back wins, not just in terms of legacy fighters, but the way that he did it, are probably 2 of the best back-to-back wins in UFC history, let alone in featherweight history. So I would go with having Ilia higher. And I think if Ilia had hung around in the division, he'd be considered the greatest featherweight of all time. But I think he's got bigger plans afoot. And I see him potentially being the greatest to ever do it. So that's where I would.
He's on his way.
He's on his way.
He's 100% on his way. And I think the only thing that could really stop him, bad decisions.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily a person and their skill set at this point. I think it's just he would have to be making bad decisions that would derail him.
I agree completely.